Columbia, and if you will persist in saying interesting things in trains, you must take the consequences." There was no possible tinge of patronage or condescension in her voice, but rather instead a bumpy, naive sort of friendliness, as lonesome royalty sliding temporarily down from its throne might reasonably contend with each bump. A king may look at a cat. He may. He may. Along the edge of the young electrician's cheekbones the red began to flush furiously. He seemed to have a funny little way of blushing just before he spoke, and the physical mannerism gave an absurdly italicized sort of emphasis to even the most trivial thing that he said. "I guess you'll have to go ahead and tell her about Rosie," he suggested grinningly to the Traveling Salesman. "Yes, oh, do tell me about Rosie," begged the Youngish Girl with whimsical eagerness. "Who in creation was Rosie?" she persisted laughingly. "I've been utterly mad about Rosie for the last half hour." "Why, Rosie's nobody at all, probably," said the Traveling Salesman a trifle wryly. "Oh, pshaw!" flushed the Young Electrician, crinkling up all the little smile tissue around his blue eyes. "Oh, pshaw! Go ahead and tell her about Rosie." "Why, I tell you it wasn't anything so specially interesting," protested the Traveling Salesman diffidently. "We simply got jollying a bit in the first place about the amount of perfectly senseless, no account truck that'll collect in a fellow's pockets. And then some sort of a scorched piece of a paper he had, or something, got him telling me about a nasty, sizzling close call he had today with a live wire. And then I got telling him here about a friend of mine, and a mighty good fellow, too, who dropped dead on the street one day last summer with an unaddressed, typewritten letter in his pocket that began, 'Dearest little Rosie.' Called her a honey and a dolly girl and a pink-fingered precious. Made a rather foolish dinner appointment for Thursday in New Haven, and was signed, in the Lord's own time, at the end of 4 pages, 'Yours forever,' and then some. Tom. Now, the wife of the deceased was named Martha." Quite against all intention, the Youngish Girl's laughter rippled out explosively and caught up the latent amusement in the Young Electrician's face. Then just as unexpectedly she wilted back a little into her seat. "I don't call that an indiscreet letter," she protested almost resentfully. "You might call it a knavish letter, or a foolish letter, because either a knave or a fool surely wrote it. But indiscreet? No." "Well, for heaven's sake," said the Traveling Salesman, "if you don't call that an indiscreet letter, what would you call one?" "Yes, sure," gasped the Young Electrician. "What would you call one?" The way his lips mouthed the question gave an almost tragical purport to it. "What would I call an indiscreet letter?" mused the Youngish Girl slowly. "Why, I think I'd call an indiscreet letter a letter that was pretty much of a gamble, perhaps, but a letter that was perfectly, absolutely legitimate for you to send, because it would be your own interests and your own life that you were gambling with, not the happiness of your wife or the honor of your husband. A letter, perhaps, that might be a trifle risky, but a letter, I mean, that is absolutely on the square." "But if it's absolutely on the square," protested the Traveling Salesman worriedly, "then where in creation does the indiscreet come in?" The Youngish Girl's jaw dropped. "Why, the indiscreet part comes in," she argued, "because you're not able to prove in advance, you know, that the stakes you're gambling for are absolutely on the square. I don't know exactly how to express it, but it seems somehow as though only the very little things of life are offered in open packages, that all the big things come sealed very tight. You can poke them a little and make a guess at the shape, and you can rattle them a little and make a guess at the size, But you can't ever open them and prove them until the money is paid down and gone forever from your hands. But goodness me!" she cried, brightening perceptibly. "If you were to put an advertisement in the biggest newspaper in the biggest city in the world, saying, 'Every person who has ever written an indiscreet letter in his life is hereby invited to attend a mass meeting,' and if people would really go, you'd see the most distinguished public gathering that you ever saw in your life. Bishops and judges and statesmen and beautiful society women and little old white-haired mothers, everybody, in fact, who had ever had red blood enough at least once in his life to write down in cold black and white the one vital, quivering, questioning fact that happened to mean the most to him at that moment. But your honey and your dolly girl and your pink-fingered precious nonsense, why, it isn't real! Why, it doesn't even make sense!" Again the Youngish Girl's laughter rang out in light, joyous, utterly superficial appreciation. Even the Serious Traveling Salesman succumbed at last. "Oh, yes, I know it sounds comic," he acknowledged wryly. "Sounds like something out of a summer vaudeville show or a cheap Sunday supplement. But I don't suppose it sounded so specially blamed comic to the widow. I reckon she found it plenty heap indiscreet enough to suit her. Oh, of course," he added hastily, "I know, and Martha knows that Tompkins wasn't at all that kind of a fool. And yet, after all, when you really settle right down to think about it, Tompkins's name was easily Tommy, and Thursday sure enough was his day in New Haven, and it was a yard of red flannel that Martha had asked him to bring home to her, not the scarlet automobile veil that they found in his pocket. 'But Martha,' I says, of course, 'Martha, it sure does beat all how we fellows that travel around so much in cars and trains are always and forever picking up automobile veils, dozens of them, dozens, red, blue, pink, yellow. Why, I wouldn't wonder if my wife had as many as 34 tucked away in her top bureau drawer.' 'I wouldn't wonder,' says Martha, stooping lower and lower over Tompkins's blue cotton shirt that she's trying to cut down into rompers for the baby. 'And Martha,' I says, 'that letter is just a joke. One of the boys sure put it up on him.' 'Why, of course!' says Martha, with her mouth all puckered up crooked as though a kid had stitched it on the machine. 'Why, of course! How dared you think—' Forking one bushy eyebrow, the Salesman turned and stared quizzically off into space. "But all the samey, just between you and I," he continued judicially, "all the samey, I'll wager you anything you name that it ain't just death that's pulling Martha down day by day, and night by night, limper and lanker and clumsier footed. Martha's got a sore thought. That's what ails her, and God help the critter with a sore thought. God help anybody who's got any one single solitary sick idea that keeps thinking on top of itself over and over and over, boring into the past, bumping into the future, fussing, fretting, eternally festering. Gee, compared to it, a tight shoe is easy slippers, and water dropping on your head is perfect peace. Look close at Martha, I say. Every night when the blowsy old moon shines like courting time, every day when the butcher's bill comes home as big as a swollen elephant, when the crippled stepson tries to cut his throat again, when the youngest kid sneezes funny like his father, who was Rosie? Who was Rosie?" "Well, who was Rosie?" persisted the Youngish Girl absent-mindedly. "Why, Rosie was nothing!" snapped the Traveling Salesman. "Nothing at all, probably." Altogether in spite of himself, his voice trailed off into a suspiciously minor key. "But all the same," he continued more vehemently, "all the same, it's just that little darned word 'probably' that's making all the mess and bother of it. Because, as far as I can reckon, a woman can stand absolutely anything under God's heaven, that she knows, but she just up and can't stand the littlest, teeniest, no account sort of thing that she ain't sure of. Answers may kill 'em dead enough, but it's questions that eats 'em alive." For a long, speculative moment the Salesman's gold-rimmed eyes went frowning off across the snow-covered landscape. Then he ripped off his glasses and fogged them very gently with his breath. "Now I